I call the Board of Selectmen meeting for February 12th, 2018 to order. As required by open meeting law, we are informing you that we will be video, audio taping, as well as live broadcasting this public meeting. In addition, anyone in the audience that wishes to video or audio tape must notify the chairman now. Hearing no one, please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Anyone for weekly briefing? Public comment and announcement.
Sharon Flieger, Wastewater Support Committee. I just wanted to let the town know that this Thursday, February 15th, we're going to be having a meeting at 6 p.m. here in the Griffin Room to discuss and go over some new information that we would have on the wastewater project.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment and announcement? Consent agenda, Larry.
Mr. Chair, I move the following consent agenda items. A is to approve the minutes, January 29, 2018, regular session. B, approve and authorize the chair to sign a letter of support for fiscal year 18 funding for the Community Development Block Grant application. C, use of Caleb Chase Fund in the amount of $700 per the request of the Council on Aging Social Services Coordinator. And D, approve the 2018 renewal of Alto Class 4 auto repair license for all-out performance.
Second. Moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. First up tonight, we had the interim water commissioner vacancy interviews. If it pleases the board, I'm going to pass that because Alan Thompson's not here yet and get started with the budget presentation. Chris, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. It's probably going to be, in half an hour, so will that buy Alan enough time, or?
The staff mentioned that he might be here a little bit late.
Okay.
So.
I just don't want to be accused of going too fast or too slow. Actually, if I could, I'd like to have Carol, if you could just pass it out to members.
I will welcome up the Finance Committee. Anyone that wants to sit closer, if you want to sit where you are to see the screen, you're welcome to. And
Always like having Jackson next to me.
Jack's going to have to call his meeting to order.
A comment or an order?
You can use Gary's gavel if you want.
Good, thank you, yeah.
It's a little one.
Thank you, Chris.
I don't have one.
So, Mr. Chairman, the Finance Committee calls the meeting to order, and we do have a quorum. Back to you.
Jack.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, the budget development is a process that takes a lot of time and energy. What I would like to do is invite Carol to come up, and just if there's additional questions. It was just so I can kind of publicly say it was a real pleasure having Carol on board. I've had a few significant personal events that have come up, so I have been a little bit more distracted than usual. And she has really filled the void for me, and I deeply appreciate that, and just want to publicly acknowledge her efforts. The development of the 2019 budget has been a little bit of a challenge, and as we go through, we'll see in there what some of the challenges are. I think one area that I know the board had several items that they wanted to have incorporated as we went, and it was a pretty tight budget year. So with that, I'll just kind of jump right in. I get to control this. She gave me the control myself. So the first thing, obviously, it's my responsibility as the administrator to make sure that we present a balanced budget. So we do have a balanced budget that's being presented to you this evening. The total amount is $65,371,876. The spending is a little bit below that, and we left a minor surplus of $2,248. So the mission has been accomplished of presenting a balanced budget. One of the things that I wanted to kind of break out a little bit is kind of the development of the budget. One of the trends that we're seeing is we have voted a lot of substantial debt, and that debt is now starting to come online. And that debt will have a tax impact onto as we develop these budgets. So actually, in this slide that we just put together, you can see that the town budget, basically the town side operation, was about 3.34%. That does include one new position. And it does also include a new budget being added in, the wastewater budget. I'll kind of discuss that a little bit later, but we do have the need to start to develop a wastewater budget because we will be in the wastewater business shortly. So when you do the town budget plus the debt, you can see that that's 11.42%. Then when you do the town, the debt, and the school, basically all in, we're at the 7.6%. Some of the budget priorities that the board had set, I had kind of indicated to the chair, I think earlier in the budget process, I thought the 2% was going to be exceptionally difficult to get to. But we do have some of the budget priorities that the board had set last year that we were able to incorporate into this year's budget. So the 2 new firefighters are included in this, and the 1 new police officer. There was a decision made by the department heads to have that be rank and file. The impact on the fire side is that we had, over the last 4 years, added individual firefighters over 2 years, so we had 2 new people, and adding 2 more allows for us to increase the shift strength. So you need 4 people in order to make a shift. So that gets us now to being able to give the chief the ability to have some flexibility on increasing overall shift strength. The new police officer would be a patrol officer. I think the purpose behind this is to make sure that the new officer frees up some of the time of some of the specialists in the department to be able to execute their specialty. One of the things that happens now is when the patrol ranks are short, they have to draw off some of those specialists and cover the patrol. So by having the additional officer in the patrol ranks, that gives the police department more nimbleness to kind of address some issues in regards to elder affairs and some of those other specialties. Those 3 positions, inadvertently last year when I was building the budget, I knew last year was a difficult year, those monies were put into the budget already for this year's budget, the 18 budget, inadvertently. And so we did not fill those positions. We thought it was important that town meeting knew about that. So we did have funding in for those positions. If town meeting votes those positions and votes this budget, we will actually recruit and hire folks for after town meeting. So we'll start them a little bit early in this budget cycle. The 1 new position that I did put in out of a lot of requests was the 1 IT professional. One of the things that I saw, and that's about $62,000, the need for the 1 IT professional is we have a 1-person department. And I think in this board over the last 6 months, we did engage having a review of our operation done to see what other towns do. And there's no other town that's close to us in just having 1. So I think we put ourselves at a significant disadvantage by just having 1 person. And no disrespect to the person in that, I think they do an outstanding job, but 1 person for a $65 million a year operation is just really not sufficient. The next one is we do have in the budget the Cultural Center and Channel 18 staff. These are both part-time positions that we would be looking to recruit. The Community Center wanted some additional staffing, and we were not able to accommodate that, and I will kind of elaborate a little bit on that component. But the Cultural Center, we do have a financing plan in which we have a revolving account that brings money in, so we will use some of that revolving account to fill some of the positions at the Cultural Center. Part-time, by law, we can only do part-time. And then on Channel 18 staff, that is something also, the money is not taxpayer money, it actually comes from the cable provider. So we did have a request in there for additional part-time support, and that would be. Both of those elements on the Cultural Center and on the Channel 18 will be below 19 hours, so will not incur benefits. On the staffing level review, you'll see that there's some material in here about what the staffing levels have been. On the town side, we have been growing staff over the last 5 years, and I just wanted to at least highlight that. Some of it is what I would call taxpayer-driven. Some of that has been fee-driven, so some operations that are driven by fees. We have increased those services over the last 5 years. But in this plan, we call for 4 positions in total. Over the last 4 years, I think it's been about 10 positions that we have added over that time. On OPEB funding, this plan actually covers OPEB funding in 2 ways. One, the annual allocation of $100,000 built into the health insurance budget. We did increase to $125,000. I was hoping to get even higher than that. I was actually hoping to really get about $300,000, but we were not able to sustain that with the revenues available to us. So the OPEB funding was went from 100 to 125, and that would be perpetual. We're able to continue to increase that. This budget does call for a one-time infusion for this year of $625,000 for a total commitment on OPEB funding of $750,000, which I think is significant, and I'll explain kind of some of the details. Health insurance, as I've talked about in the past, we had initially in the budget, I think 15%. We went down to 12%, and when the rates were set, they were set at 6%. That is one of the lowest percentages we've had. I do think that some of that number for this year was driven by 2 primary factors. Statewide, we've had historically good experience, not just at Cape Cod Municipal Health Group, but in other groups across Massachusetts, so health insurance has gone down a little bit. That rate could have potentially been down to the 5%, but the idea was that we didn't want to have an up and down effect. So the Cape Cod Municipal Health Group Steering Committee and then the overall board voted to do 6% in the hopes that we can provide some rate stabilization. But the exceptionally good year is not even a year. It's actually 7 months of historically good. And then last year wasn't as bad as once they did the audit, it came back a little bit more favorable. So we had overall, I think, a good impact. And hopefully that's something that we can carry into the future. The more our claims stay low, then definitely that number will be able to be adjusted and hopefully moderated. The other thing is on the high deductible plan that was introduced, I think that has had a very positive effect from a finance perspective, I think for the employees that signed up for that, as well as for the plan overall. We have a few kind of charts, some visuals, so you can just see. I'm not going to kind of elaborate too much on this, but you get a sense for that salary and wages is a major component of the operating budget, as people probably expect. Expenses are another area, and really the largest area that we have is education. So our commitment to education is definitely one of the bigger areas, as well as debt. Debt also is an area that is continuing to grow. Carol actually did this chart, which I think is kind of an interesting one. It's not something that I've kind of looked at, but you can kind of see a 3-year track record of how things have done. So you can see education has kind of consistently moved up each year. Not too surprising from an education standpoint because they're so heavily driven by staff levels and by staffing, where we have some opportunity where some of our departments have a higher level of expense. So sometimes you have an opportunity to effectuate expense. You could see though on the debt line, there's kind of what I was talking about. We had a little bit of a statistical anomaly in 17 into 18 where we had $1 million for the old SBA program, School Building Assistance Program was there. So we made a payment of $1 million and we got a revenue of $1 million. And then when that fell off, it gave the appearance of being lower. Where they both offset each other, it didn't really have that significant of a financial impact. But just to give people a sense for kind of how things have progressed over time. That's a 3-year look. I know this is, I think, my 5th budget message, and I think I've had this up for each one. So I am not going to elaborate on this component. But basically, as people know from if they've seen any of these presentations, I do tend to go and make sure that we are consistent with S&P, Standard & Poor's, and their top 10 management characteristics, that as we develop the budget, we try to look at these components every time we develop a budget to make sure that we're kind of consistent with that. To that end, we had Standard & Poor's came in December to go over a bond anticipation note, basically short-term borrowing, and some of the feedback that they gave us, which I thought was really positive, was very strong economy, strong management, strong budgetary performance, strong budgetary flexibility, very strong liquidity, very strong debt and contingency liability profile, and strong institutional framework. So again, I think it's important to keep in mind, Standard & Poor's looks at things strictly from the perspective of our ability to repay money that we borrow. So they don't necessarily care how many people we have employed. They want to make sure that we have the ability to repay. One of the things that I think was very impressive for them is that I believe it's about 20 different requests that we made for debt exclusions in the last 4 or 5 years, and 18 out of those 20 have been funded by the community. So from a Standard & Poor's perspective, that's a very strong indicator of our ability to repay. One thing I wanted to just kind of comment a little bit more on this too, on the December 17 review. They did reaffirm our AA plus as a stable rate. I was hoping that we would be able to migrate and head towards a AAA. Some of the other communities around us have headed towards a AAA. Personally, I think some of the uncertainty at the federal level, we have a federal government that has been a little bit chaotic, if you would. And I think that that has, in some ways, kind of made the market from this standpoint a little bit more concerning. So in terms of getting to a AAA, the areas that they said they would like to see continued improvement on, OPEB funding to make a larger commitment to that. Hence, you see that we kept those OPEB numbers in there. One of the things when I probed a little bit more about OPEB and why are we inconsistent with other parts of the country, again, Standard & Poor's reviews not only the U.S., I think they actually review governments and different entities throughout the world, that there's a lot of states in the United States. We're actually 1 out of 8 states, Massachusetts, that doesn't contribute to, we have our own retirement system and we don't contribute to Social Security. So some of those other states that do not provide for retiree benefits or health benefits for their retirees get a pass that they're fully funded. They're not really fully funded, the feds are doing it, but they don't have that benefit. That's not our case, that's something that they do look at, and they would like to have us make sure that we take care of that, or make sure we have a good plan for that. Just in reviewing some of the materials, we have one of the higher levels of discount rate because we do have a funding plan. So many other towns are at the, I think it's 3.5% level. We're at the 5% level. The highest you can go is 7%, because they do like what we've been doing. So they do like the funding plan that we have. They do like the commitment that we have made to it. The other element was on the county retirement. They thought that the retirement systems in again, other states have a higher level of contribution. That's a product of, again, you know, if you're in Social Security, that's a different animal. You don't have that financial concern. But in Massachusetts, we do. They would like to see the county retirement system be at a higher percentage than they currently are. So those were 2 of their key components that they had laid out as concerns as to why they felt that we should not move from a AA to a AAA. I did include the same map that we had before. You can see that we are, the yellow are the AA plus. We share with Yarmouth, Harwich, Truro up a little bit, but we are surrounded by AAA. Dennis was, I think, fairly recently named a AAA, Brewster, within the last 5 years also, and then Chatham were on the newer end of that spectrum. Again, I think it was pre-2016 election, so a little different dynamic when they got their rating than when we got our rating. I have the overall budget message, I think in total ended up about 36 pages. So there's a lot of content that is in there. I just wanted to kind of highlight some of the topics that I tried to cover in that, and each section has its own individual write-up. Maintain and enhance levels of service. Every time I try to develop the budget, it's to try to maintain the level that we have now and to identify where those areas are, where we want to enhance, to make sure that there's a known commitment and a known understanding of what we're doing. The next one is educational opportunities. I do kind of highlight in some of the write-up that, you know, the Cape is an interesting place because we have a lot of school choice opportunities, and I think it's very, very important to make sure that we have stability when we develop the budget for education, because I think any sign of instability tends to lead families to choose other towns and choose other options, which has a negative financial impact on us. So when people leave our district and go to another district, it has a financial consequence. I think Monomoy has shown real progress. I think that they've been able to develop and develop their product, and I think that you start to see that in some of the numbers that I have in the report, where they've been able to stabilize some of their enrollment numbers, where other places the enrollment numbers have gone down. I do have a slide on the human resources and collective bargaining, so I will talk about that a little separately. Comprehensive wastewater management plan, I also have another slide. And then just on financial management, we always look at capital debt and reserves, which we will get to. This is a slide that shows some of the enhancement of level services requests. So you can see in here the IT, 62,000 for an IT professional, and then Channel 18, that would be funded from cable receipts, but that's just under 10,000. We will have the ability to remove some money in the fire budget and police budget for hiring the people that are contemplated. This contemplated having the FY19 budget, had them hired after July 1. If we hire them early, we have the ability to save almost $50,000. So I think that's a kind of a worthwhile endeavor. DPW had $69,000 for a building maintenance position, basically a support person for Sean. That was probably one of my tougher reductions that had to be made. The pet crematory operator, we don't believe that that will be operational in 19, or if it is, we can do some kind of temporary arrangement, but it has to be constructed if it's voted. And then I did want to point out, I did not include, and if the board wanted me to, if you want me to go back and look, I'm sure I can probably find about $25,000 worth of reductions. The two things that I did not put in the budget that you may want to consider having me do that is the Sunday operation at the community center. I know that was something that the board wanted, and the unstaffed hours. I don't believe we have enough resources to do the full 25, but the Sunday operation I think is roughly half that, and then the Sunday operation for rec is 14,000. So that would be something that if the board wanted. The Council on Aging had a request for an additional staffer as a receptionist, 36,000. That was not included in this. So out of all the positions that were requested, we just did the IT professional and the videographer because that's paid for from separate funds. The other thing, I did get some information from the Finance Committee for about 21,000, 22,000 to increase the funding of the elected officials. I did not include that in the budget, but again, if there was a decision made that if you wanted me to cut 25, I could probably fund that or fund the Sunday operation, whichever the board chooses to approach. This chart, I would like to just this just shows some of the numbers in review of this. I would like to have a little bit more time to go over that. I think some of these numbers, I think really the key message in this is you looked at in 2004, which kind of the last significant override in FY 2005, we had staffing levels of about 190, and you could see in 18, it shows about 190. So we're only now getting back to those levels we were. But this shows part-time and full-time. Some of these in kind of a little bit more of a review of this material today. Some of them are funded by receipt revenue and not taxpayer revenue. So you see some of that increase isn't necessarily a burden onto the taxpayer, but comes from various fees. On the collective bargaining status, we do have, most of the contracts are up to date. I believe there's 8 contracts in total. There's only one that we've had prolonged negotiation, that's with the Harwich Employee Association. We are working on that. Hopefully, we're coming close to a resolution. And when that gets settled, it would be settled for 3 years, so it'll go from 18, 19 to 20. So you'll see that we'll have everybody up to date. We are in active negotiation with the firefighters, and we will be entering into negotiations with the managers union, SEIU. And we have not yet initiated negotiations with the machinists and aerospace workers. It's really the water department. So they picked kind of a little bit of a union with a different name, but it's water department. So it's not, we don't have aeronautical engineers that work for us. In terms of, we did have, as I had reported before, we had a very good year on free cash. So we had $3.5 million. So the breakout of that, I wanted to have approximately half and half, as much as I can have it be half and half, where we have half goes towards building reserves and the other half goes towards one-time or capital-related expenses. So we have the capital budget items, which we'll have a slide on that, is about 1.4. We have Monomoy capital assessment. Again, I would like to have taken that out and put that into taxpayer, but I think we have to fund it again through the available free cash, so 225. Snow and ice, we allocate about 500,000. That seems to be a sufficient amount in a tough year. I think from my conversation with Mr. Hooper, we've already spent the local budget, so we have 135 in our local budget, and we're probably about 100,000 into that. So if we can have a mild finish to the year, that would be super. And we can then put that money, whatever's the remaining balance, into one of 2 reserves. We did do, that's the 625, as I alluded to earlier, for OPEB funding. So we have the 125 built into the operating budget, and then 625 coming out of free cash. Again, just for folks that may not have, I got to be aware, on free cash, it's not free money. It's actually at the end of each fiscal year, there's a truing up that happens. So any money that gets turned back, or any revenue that was over, or any one-time money that comes in, the fiscal year is closed out. And in our case, the closeout led to a surplus of $3.5 million. The stabilization, the cultural center subsidy is back in there. So we have 125,000. We did develop a budget, which we will be putting together and submitting to the board for the operation of the cultural center. So it'll be 125,000 subsidy, and then about 125,000, maybe a little bit more than that, from fees. We already set up the revolving account last year, so that's where we would fund the part-time positions. We would not fund the part-time positions out of this $125,000 amount. It would be out of the fee amount. The stabilization is 500,000, so we're able to contribute to stabilization in a significant way. I did, basically from some discussions with the Chamber of Commerce, they've historically been at $25,000. They had made a request of me to go to 30,000, so I have in this plan to do that. I would say, at least in my humble opinion, I think that we have an outstanding working relationship with the Chamber, and I think that we have really been working well, and I think it makes some sense to give some due consideration to that request. The libraries, these are the other non-town libraries. That's consistent at a consistent level, 20,000. On the Cultural Council, the 3,000 is historic. Last year we put in, and again this year, we have about $80,000 identified in operating budget small capital. And then we have a provision, although we don't have any things that have been identified yet, to my knowledge, of prior year unpaid bills. So we have a contingency for that component. Just on the Monomoy assessment, I do wish to kind of publicly thank the superintendent. We did have some discussions. I think his initial budget estimate was closer to 3.9 or 3.8. And we did ask them if they would be able to go in and take a look and make some adjustment. So they did make some adjustment. As memory serves, about $139,000 off of our assessment they were able to reduce. We just got the final word of that on Thursday. So they went to their budget review, and I think it was favorably received in their budget review. So they did go down. So their overall percent for the Harwich assessment is 3.43. Some of that, too, is driven by state formulas. So in terms of it, that's the number. So you can see their overall budget impact is 3.32. We're a little bit higher because of those assessments that the state issues, and Chatham was a little bit lower because of the assessment. Some of those assessments go into wealth factors. Did we have a good year? Did they not have a good year? So we may have had a slightly better year than Chatham financially, which would be one of the indicators that would lead to us tipping a little bit more towards Harwich. On Cape Tech, I know that he was in. This is the same slide. I think this shows some of the volatility that exists in the school choice process. Not that the school choice is necessarily as relevant on the vocational school side. I think if a child is going to do vocational school, that's a decision. But here you can see the district kept their budget increase to 1%, but overall, they ended up losing 33 kids out of the system. I don't know if I have it on. Yeah, I don't think I have the numbers on here. Yeah, actually, we do have the numbers. But you can see that Yarmouth went from 137 kids down to 114. So when you have a net decrease in the amount of kids in the system, that kind of plays a little havoc with the formulas. So you can see in Harwich's case, we had 77 kids in 18. They estimate 77 kids in 19. So we have 13%, so that's consistent. So one would think, okay, you stayed level, so why aren't we at the 0.97, just under 1%? But because the overall decreased, what that had, and we stayed constant, was we ended up with a 6.3% increase in assessment. So just in terms of enrollment changing and fluctuating has an impact in terms of the budgeting perspective. So for us, it is the 6.3 instead of the 0.97. The one thing, too, I probably should mention, the superintendent mentioned this when Mr. Sanborn, when he was here, that they had, I believe it was $100,000 worth of short-term borrowing expense that they will absorb in this year's, in the 19 budget. But our assessment for the construction of the new school will start in earnest in the 2020 budget. On the CWMP, I had kind of alluded to returning to that. In this year's request, there's 3 components to it. One would be the installation of the pipes and the pump station for Chatham, so this most likely would be on the Chatham side. But if we supply about 90% of the flow, then it's our obligation to pay 90% of the expense. They are in the process of reviewing the numbers, at least initially here. They've indicated to me that the planning number of 2.1 they think is still reasonable, but hopefully in the next month I'll have a better idea on that. And then on the construction of sewers, so we did last year the IMA with Chatham, and we did the design phase. This is the construction. So this $22,280,000 constructs and brings about, I think it's 8 miles of pipe, lays 8 miles of pipe in the ground, and has 6 pump stations that will need to be constructed as part of the overall system. So that is getting us into compliance with the CWMP by bringing us to a conclusion of phase 2 once that's done. I'm very happy to report that the CPC committee, I guess 3 times was a charm. They did fund the Hinckley's Pond alum treatment, so that $675,000 would be funded from CPC. Just, I have another component here where we look at some of the information on historic information. Here is just the base levy limit. The base levy limit is how much to go up. A lot of folks realize or know about Proposition 2.5. What they also have to include in that number is an item called new growth. So we do have, for planning purposes, a low new growth number that we use in the budget. And then when the new growth number comes in higher, that gives us some ability to not minimize, but moderate a little bit the tax rate. In this case, you can see, I know these numbers are small, so I'll read for you. Taking from 2015 to 2018, about 3.5%, 3.7%, 3.7%, and 3.3%. So really, for revenue from the residents of the community, the typical is the 2.5 plus the new growth, which has equated to between 3.3% and 3.7%. So when we balance the budget, we try to balance the budget within that 3.7%. I'm sorry, the 3.5%. On the levy limit calculation, again, this is kind of a little bit of a busy slide. The main thing is the brown here that's shown is the typical Prop 2.5 plus new growth increase. And then you can see the town has for quite a while relied upon, and probably will continue to rely heavily upon, debt exclusions. So these debt exclusions, you can see that element in the yellow. As bonds get paid off or as they decrease, that we then add others on. So it is a net number and not a gross number that's presented in these slides. We had an issue, not an issue, but a couple years ago where we had a historic track record of fairly low excess levy capacity, slightly below the amount total that we could finance for. In 2016, we had an adjustment where we actually increased local receipts by almost $700,000. That had an impact of having an excess levy capacity. In the budget message from 2 years ago, I had said we would try to do that over a couple years, 2 to 3 years. So we have taken that over 2 years, 3 years, to be able to use that capacity to make the budget work. Just for some select budget data, we have, this is just kind of the general revenue, so you get a sense for money that comes in. The vast majority of the money comes from, I'm sorry, hit the wrong button, comes from the 2.5. So this is the money that we get from collections. So it just to kind of show, and then on general fund expenses, you can get a sense for how much is spent on the different areas. On the, I was asked, I think 2 years ago or 3 years ago, to provide some understanding in terms of, okay, if you hire somebody, what is the fringe benefit calculation that goes in? So we have, again, updated this from last year. So if you have a public safety professional that comes in, let's say they start at $70,000, when you factor in family health, when you factor in retirement assessment, and then IOD, they have a separate statute. They don't do workers' comp. They do what's called injured on duty. And then factor in an allocation for unemployment. You get the total amount of fringe benefits, so it's roughly 37%. So for every $100,000 worth of expense for salary, there's an additional $37,000 that needs to be allocated for that. Public Works, it's a little bit higher, 43%. Some of that, I think, is really driven by Public Works from a workers' compensation perspective, is a little bit more of a dangerous occupation, so that tends to be a little bit higher. As you can see, the admin staff is 37%, so the real thing that, not skews it, but that has a impact on it is the workers' comp views DPW operations as being a little bit more hazardous. And then the water operations also, any manual labor type jobs tend to have those elements to it, and then harbor and others. So you can see that we range from a low of 37% to a high of 44% for those indirect costs. I'm sorry, for fringe benefit costs. The debt structure actually didn't come out. On the material I passed out, that didn't come out. This slide should have been on there. As you can see on the slide, this does factor in existing and proposed debt. So I was asked, I think it was last year, to include, yes, to include in there what the ramifications of the wastewater program. So you can see the wastewater program starts to really backfill as we get into that. I believe it's the brown level here is the Monomoy school debt. So you can see that as that goes down, some of that is being backfilled, and as other projects. People will point out, and I agree 100%, I was requested to do the full debt schedule out for 40 years worth of construction. Certainly, there's no doubt we'll need updates to fire stations, update to town hall and different buildings that we don't currently have on a plan that will probably emerge somewhere during that 40-year time horizon. But this just gives you an indication that, you know, the wastewater program is fundable. The line that's in there is a typical, I think it's 3% growth line or 3.5% growth line. So you can see that we are going to have some pain in the short term as we start to bring this up. And then as we go out longer, there will be some capacity, obviously some capacity will be absorbed in other building improvements. This is the water debt that they have, and on the bottom here we indicate, and everything that I'm alluding to we'll have on the website or is in the budget message. So if you want to take your time and go through and look, you can see the ramifications. But we do have the individual projects that are on there for the water debt service. We do break out water because water is an enterprise fund. Just for, again, folks at home that may say, why are you picking on water? It's just a separate funding source that comes from water fees. On the capital side, you can see the total of the capital. We do have the breakdown. I think I've gone over capital at least 3 or 4 times. So I was just going to kind of just hit some high notes on this. Just a large portion of debt exclusion. That mostly is the fire station and the wastewater program. Here's the capital requests by department, so you get a sense for department over the next several years out from 2019 to 2025. You can see the 2 blips. One of the things that I had kind of indicated that the wastewater program has where it operates on a 5-year cycle, if you would. We broke this cycle into 2, Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan, Phase 2, where we did $12 million last year and then $22 million this year. So you can, or $24 million this year. So you can see that. And then hopefully as we build this, take a little bit of a hiatus. And then in 2024, we'll be back again with kind of more wastewater type topics. Again, just similar information, just presented a little bit differently in the graph. So you can see fire at the $6 million for the new station, and then wastewater at the $22 million. We do have kind of the funding plan. I may just run through some of these fairly quickly. A lot of these are ones that we had in before. So $250,000 for the construction of the sidewalk, $140,000 for energy plan, $130,000 for carpet, $40,000 for boilers, $100,000 for the phase 2 of the townwide radio system. I did add this in. I had a request of the deputy chief. Apparently his vehicle is failing faster. So I did make 2 decisions that the capital outlay committee is not aware of. Both of them were under $50,000, so not necessarily within their purview, but I want to at least point those out. One was the deputy chief's vehicle, and then the other one was the vehicle for the Natural Resources Department at $29,000. These would be funded from free cash. Ambulance replacement, we're able to fund the ambulance this year, $340,000 out of free cash. We did fund it 1 year out of a capital exclusion, but we have been more successful than not of funding it out of free cash, so we were able to fund it out of free cash this year. And then DPW had some vehicles, not all the vehicles they wanted, and Rec had a vehicle, and then the Bank Street parking lot pavement, for a grand total of $1,446,000. The 78.5, I think I alluded to earlier that we would be funding approximately $80,000 from free cash. These are just some of those items. As you can see, a lot of computers, radar units, just different types of equipment. We did break out the debt exclusions. The debt exclusions, we typically do this, $700,000 to maintain our 5-year road maintenance program. As I've alluded to already, the $22 million for the water, wastewater, and then for the fire would be $6 million for the Station 2 construction. We do hope, last year we did the golf operation where the vast majority of that would fund from golf fees. We do hope that the cemetery operation over a longer period of time for a 20-year borrowing, the pet crematory and the pet crematory equipment, which totals over $500,000, that we are able to take a large amount of that out of fees. We do need that obviously up and operational to collect those fees. So in the short term, there may be some funding that would come from taxpayers, but in the long term, it would be funded primarily with fees. And then on the reserve fund balances, I think this is a chart over time. This is did we look this up? Is it a 2-year or 3-year trend line? I didn't look it up. A 3-year trend line. So I wanted to look at where the dotted line that you see is a trend line for 3-year average. So you can see that there was literally a bottoming out in 2022 when it comes to certified free cash. When you budget really closely and tightly, you tend to get the greater opportunity for that. You can see the trend line since has progressed up in a nice way. I do think in this budget, and as you read the budget message, I think it would be better to have free cash be in the $1.5 to $2 million range. I don't think we want to ask taxpayers for more than we need to ask. And what this is showing is that we are getting a fair amount of one-time revenue, and our revenue amounts are higher. So we did increase significantly the amount that we have dedicated from local receipts, and that was done on purpose to try to bring these lines when you've had 2 years where we've been over $3.5 million. I'd like to get those down closer to $2 million as a more consistent number. So by increasing local receipts, we hope to accomplish that in this year's budget cycle. And then I did revise, or actually I should say Carol revised this chart. One of the things that for the longest time, the AA+ rating, they were looking for about 10% reserves. Recently, they have been moving those numbers up, unfortunately for us in some ways. So by moving those numbers up, now a lot of AAA rated communities are closer to that 20% target. So what you can see here is that we have more consistently, the 16, 17, and 18 are all actual numbers. So you can see that we've now well exceeded the target of 10%, and we are well on our way to the 20% target. We need to hit that 20% target and be there for a couple years, I think, to get some credit. But the blue is free cash. We did not put in an estimate for free cash, but you can see that by building in, now we are at the $5 million level between OPEB funding and stabilization to kind of meeting our obligations. And from a finance perspective, strictly from a Standard & Poor's perspective, this is the number that they want to see. Obviously, the free cash not being negative and making sure the free cash stays in a positive fund balance is an important piece. But if you see a consistent amount of free cash coming in, you can see that we're going to continue to make that progress towards where we need to be. So just for illustration purposes, if that's $5 million and we have $2 million in free cash, we would be right in this area, very close to where we are. So we just showed this one. I did a projection for 19, what it would look like, and you could see that we are continuing to grow those reserves in this budget cycle by over $1 million. And I think that concludes the overview. A lot of material. The budget message is online. So I would encourage folks to look at it. I think we were able to put the budget message online on Friday. We finished it Friday. Again, just a thank you to Carol, and actually, quite honestly, to all the department heads. It's a real effort We did go through and met with every single department as we developed the budget to make sure that what they were asking, that, you know, it had validity to it. And it's always tough. I think I ended up making over $1 million worth of cuts from what was initially presented to what was presented this evening. So it was $1,065,000. So there was definitely a lot. Some of it was me. We tried to get the OPEB from 100,000 up to 300,000, and we couldn't do that. But I just wish to thank the department heads, and as is my obligation to present a balanced budget. So I present a balanced budget. We will have the detailed line item budget of, I think it's 136 pages, as per the charter to you guys, probably in the next day or so. So you'll have all this material. I think we'll distribute the slides and distribute the budget to you in the next day or so. And then if there's any initial questions, I'm happy to field them, Mr. Chairman,
Thank
unless
you,
you want
Chris.
to get to water.
Thank you, Chris. Jack, we'll
All right.
start with you.
Mark?
No questions, so we'll get to the details.
John?
I have no questions.
Dana?
Same, yeah, no, I'm gonna wait for, we have more to follow on this.
Ed? We'll have more. Just a couple questions, please. When is the Pet Cemetery building project going to start and end?
The request is to construct it for FY19, so if town meeting votes favorably for it and the debt exclusion is voted, the idea is that we would begin design and construction in July, and I think it's slated to be finished in the late spring.
Okay. And when do you add that person that's in here at about $8,000?
Yeah, I did not put that in. My estimate, my estimation is that if we don't finish things and get things operational until July 1 of 19, then that won't become operational budgetarily until the fiscal year 20. So we would build that in for the fiscal year 20.
That's all I had right now.
Thank you, Jack. Dana?
Just, one quick one, you didn't have a recommendation on the salary increases for elected officials, the ones that we identified. Do you want a recommendation from where that would come from the finance committee, or?
I'm happy to make the reductions of the 25,000 and fund that. The reason I kind of went back and forth, and, you know, to be perfectly honest, I think for 3 of the first 4 budgets I did, I put it in, it was taken out right away. So I have to admit, I guess I was a little bit gun shy. So I did want to disclose that, you know, if the Board of Selectmen were to vote to have me put that back in, or the Sunday operation, I think that we could do that. But anything more dramatic is going to have an impact on the overall budget. And one thing, if I could say too, just since the Finance Committee is here, I know we have March 3rd is our, I think it's March 3rd, Saturday, budget meeting. I have received a request from one of the larger departments. I have a department, the budget presenter, that has booked a cruise already and doesn't want to lose the deposit on it. I feel for him, so I said that I would intentionally bring up tonight. I'm sure there may be other department heads that may be troubled with getting in on a Saturday. But if we could schedule maybe on a Thursday night to do 1 or 2 other budgets, or maybe 5 or 6, whatever, makes sense. But I would at least ask if people could look at their schedules and see if we can do an additional night beyond the Saturday during the day for the request of at least one department. Thank you.
You all set? Ed's all set?
I was going to listen to what you got to say.
Ed's all set?
Can't hear here.
I just want to make sure Ed was all set. Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's not so much of a question, but I'm still staying on the subject from when the schools came in. It's nice that they offered as an initial offer to reduce some of this. I get the percentage allocation from Harwich to Chatham, and that's a shifting target. I get that they've got state requirements, but even with the reduction, before it was about 25.8% over a 5-year period. That's not sustainable. I mean, there was this underlying promise that if we did this, it was going to wind up stabilizing our education costs. Where we've landed is still in the mid-3s. We're taking the hit to be able to afford that. on the town side. And I'm not sure that we can continue to do that ad infinitum. They got to find a way, stabilizing the ship and getting closer to the 2.5 to 3%, because if it was a separate entity, I mean, I can say right now, the regional school system has saved us on transportation costs, because that was one of the allures of doing it. They're not here, but I would hope that there's a second phone call where they found an additional amount of money somewhere.
All set, Don? Janelle?
So Chris, I just have a question on page 3. I was surprised to see a cultural center staff position put in there. But I'm wondering, because I know last year we approved, I think it was 6 hours for cultural center, but then Carolyn was able to rearrange hours for community center and create a 19-hour position. So my question is, on page 33, you've also, was it 33? Excuse me. What page was it? One of these pages. Can't remember which one, I'm sorry. You also had community center staffing. It was for the Sundays and uncovered desk hours.
Yes.
So I'm wondering, is the cultural center's position that you're talking about on page 3 one and the same as the unstaffed?
Yeah, no, two different. I don't know the page.
I know, I had it just a second ago.
Just in terms of that,
Here it is, page 11.
page
Sorry.
11. So I think what we're doing here is there's two elements. Because we have, the cultural center has its own funding source that we can use, that revolving account. As the building fills up, I mean, this is a good problem to have, as the building fills up, it is getting heavier use. So we did have the 6 hours last year, and Carolyn was creative to get some of the additional funding, and we put a person over there at less than, I think, 19 hours. So we have some coverage. We also have some coverage for custodians. I think what the plan is, and we will bring the plan back separately. I know Carolyn's worked on that, so we can have a separate, more lengthy discussion. But the concept would be to continue to bring in additional part-time custodians and additional part-time people for the cultural center, funded by the fees we're collecting from the cultural center. This was, in terms of this enhanced level of services, we have, the community center is covered for a portion of time with only custodians. So what we're trying to do here was custodians are being asked to do additional work beyond setup. They're being asked to do things that really should be done by a reception person or a clerical person. So what we were trying to do was to get 2 people in the building at any one time. So we would have clerical coverage for Monday through Saturday, to be able to cover some of those hours that are now only covered by custodians, early morning and so on. So that request for $25,000 covered the unstaffed hours, so the non-staffed clerical hours. And then the Sunday operation was Sunday, how do we have it open with a clerical person and with a recreation person? So that's what that talks about. So 2 different concepts. How do we more fully fund and get 2 people in the building, a custodian and clerical in the building Monday through Saturday, and then Sunday operations.
On that, are you also including the soft holidays in the Sunday description? So things like Martin Luther King Day, Patriots Day?
I think that's
Yes.
included in that 25,000 number,
Okay.
the soft holidays.
Okay. When you were presenting the initial budget priorities, you said 1 part-time person at the cultural center. So I'm a little confused, because now you're saying the revolving fund would also be paying a custodian, a part-time custodian. So that's more than 1 position.
Yeah, on that, we'll do a separate, this is for the general fund budget, so what's funded by the taxpayer. We will come in with a budget that's based upon the revenue that we collect from the fees. So we'll do that, a fee budget
So
for,
that's
present
separate.
to the board. That'd be separate, yes.
So right now, you're looking at a part-time cultural center person funded by the general fund.
Are you still on 11? I think I,
That's page 3. That's, 11 was the enhanced level of services.
yeah, no, the cultural
budget
center
cut.
and the Channel 18 staff, these ones would be the fee-funded positions. So
That's
there's no
fee-funded.
taxpayer-funded ones. I should have put fee-funded in there. So that would be part of the revolving account.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Yep.
Julie?
So I have a couple of sort of overview until we get into more detail, but with the Judah Eldridge, if that were to pass at town meeting,
Mm-hmm.
that would be, what, 369
369.
coming in, right?
Yes.
Because we'd be shifting. And then in terms of the monies we took in for people who prepaid their taxes, is that factored into?
Yeah, actually, the state doesn't allow us to account for one-time revenues. So the money that would come in on Judah Eldridge would be in our tax title account, which is specifically identified by the DOR as not being a sustainable revenue source. So that 369 would come in and would become free cash. So one of the things that we've done, well, not that we've done, if all goes according to plan, we would be able to almost automatically say that free cash next year would start at 369,000 and build up from there. There's 3 components to free cash. One is any budget turnbacks. The departments don't need that. You start to see that kind of closing a little bit as people get tighter. And then on the revenue side, we have built in where we're not at the full amount. By board policy, we do about 90% of the revenue, so we expect about 10% more to come in. So on that, actually about $11 million is the total that we get. So about 10% of that is about $1 million is what we estimate. We've been a little higher than that, and that's why I was saying I'm trying to narrow that down a little bit. So the revenue estimates are lower, so they come in higher. So revenue is one element, expense is the other, and the third is the one-time money that comes in.
Okay, thank you.
Larry?
Thank you. I have a couple questions and comments. I want to first follow up with Don's concern about the school. When I look at the budgets that we were presented, the school shows basically a 3.9% increase if I exclude debt, which we have no control over. So we look at basically operating expenses, 3.9% increase. And I know that in your budget message, Chris, it might be theirs as well, going forward, they've projected a 3.25% increase, which I even think that's a little bit high. And also based on past experience, that's extremely optimistic. I wish we could hold them to that. But if we could, if they could hold to that this year, for instance, at 3.25%, that would net us another over $200,000, which, for instance, would cover the capital expense they're asking us for. So I really hope they go back and look at some of these expenses a little bit in a little more detail, because it's just holding us to their commitment. Even projection going forward, either they have no intention of meeting that, or we have to watch them harder, I guess. That's the comment on the school. I think that it can be looked at again. Generally speaking, we've been trying to budget for some years to a 2.5% increase. And I note going forward in a 5-year projection, that's changed to trying to budget to a 3.5% increase, which is a town, I'm not sure how sustainable that is going over a long term. And I do think we have a lot of things coming on, but I do think we need to look at, I wasn't around when they passed a 2.5% increase, but as far as I can tell, that wasn't intentionally an automatic that we're going to increase 2.5% every year. It was the whole, at that point, taxes were going crazy, so it brought them down. But now we've not only are budgeting to 2.5% as a take-in, now we're budgeting to a 3.5%. So I would challenge that as we talk going forward. That's my. I have a couple more detailed questions, so maybe I'll just, since I'm the last, I can start on those. Chris, you've put in $100,000 for the wastewater operational,
Yes.
which I appreciate. I mean, I'm not challenging that at all. My question is that going into the enterprise fund that's on the town warrant, the wastewater?
Yeah, actually, I think there's two things to answer that. The town of Chatham, and I did answer this at wastewater, the wastewater support committee, but I think it's a good opportunity. The town of Chatham has, I think, 800 people hooked up to their system. Their operation cost is about $1 million to operate their facility. You can't get $1 million out of 800 people hooked up. So what they do is they do what we're doing here. I wish I could say it was my idea. It's not my idea. I'm just following Chatham's lead, that we have to take and start to build up a operating budget to be able to offset. Because the revenue that we'll get in 3 years from now from 628 properties that have been identified will not be enough. I think our obligation to them is 23%. And if their contract, just their contract to operate the facility is over $1 million, we're looking at, we need 230,000. And that's not even operating cost of sending them material. So I'm trying to build up a number. The second thing that we need to do, so we need to have a subsidy amount, and then what we'll do is we'll create a revolving or a enterprise account that for the money that comes in from the ratepayers, once we do hook them up, will be used directly for those operation costs. But we're not going to generate enough to offset the expenses that we'll have that we've contracted with Chatham for. So what we would be doing, and they're still doing it after 10 years, they subsidize their enterprise fund with taxpayer money to offset the few number of people that they have hooked up. And that's what we're started down.
Thank you for that explanation. My question is more directed towards the mechanics of it. If we put $100,000 in that, that's for this budget year. You've kind of implied that you'll increase that to 200, another 100
Yes.
next year. How do we protect that $100,000 this year and then it builds up to 200 next year? Does that go
Yeah,
immediately into an enterprise fund? Otherwise, I don't see how you protect it if it's not, if it's
Yeah,
just a general budget item.
The best way to visualize it is, it is a general budget item. And basically, if you want to think
So-
about it, instead of, this 100,000 is coming from taxpayers. So when we build a budget for next year, when I build a budget
So
for
your
next
intent is
year-
not to spend that, that'll be a carryover,
Right.
in your that's what I'm trying to get at.
We
is how-
can't carry over because we would turn the money back, so that would become vastly free cash, but it's built into the base. It's built into that Proposition 2.5 base. So now we start at 100,000 in the FY '20 budget cycle, and then we can go to 150, and then up to 200, or whatever number we need to get to.
So year
Make sure
two,
we
we
have
would have
subsidy.
$200,000 somewhere to spend, and that's protected? I mean, I'm
We
just
keep-
trying, how we, I
becomes
still don't
part-
understand how you get there.
It becomes part of our property tax allocation. It's the same as police and fire. It's the same as their budget. They start each year with, whatever their number is, $5 million. We're building a wastewater budget from scratch. So the 100,000 stays in.
Okay, so you're opposite from zero-based budgeting. You're saying that once it's in the budget, it's in the budget. Is that
Yeah.
kind of where, and that's okay.
Well,
We
my
can, we
belief
can do
is-
that.
My belief is that, budgeting is really progressive incrementalism, which, you build off of what you have for the year before.
I'll take your word for that. I just want to be sure it's protected.
Should
Somehow it's
trademark that,
building up.
progressive incrementalism.
I'm writing it down.
Yeah.
That's my term. Just for the record.
You okay?
I'm totally right.
Came up with that about 15 years
Uh,
ago.
just a comment, if I may.
He wrote it down.
On the IT position in computers, I'm definitely in favor of that. I'm not in favor of it until we get a look at the overall IT structure. Because a good study was done and showed what people are doing, and they're adding to that. I still like to go back and see, how does it all fit together? What you would be doing outside, inside, that the computer smashed it, I think we still need that to happen, to be sure we're spending the money wisely.
Yeah, the
I'd
only-
hate just to add something.
The only thing
to
I would say to
existing.
that is, in the development of the budget, and I don't remember how many computers we have, but well in excess of 100 computers. All what this does is, as computers start to lose their credibility, lose their functionality, he's changing them out. So we do have, in different budgets, have some provision to change out. The only real expansion that we have in here is we did do, the community center had asked to do a more wholesale upgrade. And even that, instead of doing it in 1 year, I think we allocated that over 2 years. So I think that the study needs to be done.
We're talking cross purposes. I'm all for expanding it and doing this. I just want to have someone look at and be sure we're doing it the right way.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's all, fitting together the new technology we had and so on. I'm not objecting, we need more IT, I'm not objecting to that. I'm objecting to do it just adding on what we have without looking at, can we be networking better? Can we be sharing programs better together? To make sense of it.
I guess all I'm
One-
saying, we're just sustaining the levels,
we're-
and then what we need to do beyond, it will have to be an additional effort.
One last comment I have, workers' comp is always a concern of mine because it happens, but there's a tendency to take that for granted. And I would hope that we'd always go back and look at training, the safety equipment we have, overtime, people get tired. And I would like to see you come back with a program specifically, addressed at how we're looking at workers' comp and reducing that.
Yeah, just for that, we do have MIA, Massachusetts Interlocal
Right.
Insurance Association. They do have, I think it's quarterly loss control meetings. We go through every claim and make sure that, okay, how did the person get hurt? Did they get hurt because they were tired? Did they get hurt because they didn't have the right equipment? So we do that review now. Our experience
And then how do you
isn't
bring that back
bad.
to the, no, I'm not saying that, I'm saying we always should look at it and see if we can improve it.
I agree.
Because anytime it gets hurt, and bring that back to the people, whether it's an organized training. I don't see, I see that, but I'd like to see more of an organized reaction to it, if
We
I
do,
may.
we do. We can get you some of the materials on
Okay.
on what we do for
Okay.
training.
I've taken enough time.
What's that, Larry? Don?
Yeah, just to follow up to what Larry was saying, through you, Mr. Chair. Is there something that overtly would prohibit you from putting that money into the revolving, the new
Enterprise account?
enterprise fund?
No.
Because it just seems, while you're building tax capacity, it just seems like you're actually saying with a straight face that you're building up your free cash for the next year for items that have nothing to do with that. Why wouldn't we bank this for a purpose and put it in the enterprise fund and start building it?
I think we can do that. That's not a bad idea at all.
I'd like to look into that.
Thank you.
First, Chris, thank you. Very detailed budget message, so thank you and your team.
Yeah.
I did take the day to look at other towns' budget messages and on Cape and off Cape, and this is an extremely detailed budget message with a lot of history. I thought it was very helpful. 7.6 is a huge number. The Board of Selectmen's budget message was 2%, so there's quite a gap there. I think looking at the 3.34 before you look at the debt is a great number. What is in that debt, Chris? Does that include both the land side and the water side of Saquatucket? Does that include everything that we've got so far?
Yeah, but we did take, as we had indicated to town meeting, so we have the gross net number is offset by local fees that we collect, so it's only the net number.
Okay. So looking forward, I mean, I hope we're all going to look at the $30 million ask this year and what that means to the budgets in the near future and what we're asking of our taxpayers. I'll reserve most of my questions for when we get into the detail. Tax levy, I agree with Larry, 2.5% was allowable, not automatic. I think if I look at this correctly over the last 9 years, it's just automatic with us. It's 2.5% plus growth. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, I don't know how that's sustainable to this town with all the big projects that we're working on. We haven't really started to get into the big project yet, but we're about to. So this, in my mind, I don't see how we can even go to the taxpayers this year with 7.6% and ask them for $30 million on top of that. The tax levy at 2.5%, you also have a number in there, plus 250,000 in growth. Will you just tell me what the $250,000 growth, where
Yeah,
that calculation comes from?
Each year, we have, new growth is when we have, just for instance, we have a property that's vacant land. A developer comes along and develops that property. We get to capture that in what the law calls it as new growth. So we used to tax it as, let's just say the value as raw land was whatever, $50,000. And now that it has a house on it, it can be valued at 250.
So is that based on current building permits, or is this just a guess?
Actually, more a historic average.
Okay.
We've always been well above that. I think we're the smallest amount we've collected is closer to 400,000.
Okay.
And that actually is to the advantage of the taxpayer, because if we don't levy that, we have that ability to take that differential.
I just wanted to know if it was a guess or if it was based on average.
It's based upon historic.
School budget, you moved, it looks like we moved 225,000 into a capital exclusion, or into capital, sorry, to be paid for out of free cash. In the last presentation, I don't recall 225,000 in there, was it?
It's been in there.
So, in the school budget, does that still include the $130,000 ask for the restrooms at the track?
Yes, it does.
So that's still in the school budget?
Yes.
And the $50,000 stabilization?
Yes. If both of those were to come out, that number would go down.
Okay,
The free cash number, not the budget number.
okay, and then it would come out of the free,
It would come out of free cash, not out of the taxpayers.
okay, so not out of their budget.
Correct.
So that is in the 225,
Yes.
okay. And then we did ask back to get some sort of sense of where the Booster Club was spending that money, and I haven't received that yet. But I hope that the school will at least come forward with some of that
Yeah, they
information.
did provide some material. I don't think they provided the booster information, though.
So, staying on the school, the other thing that I looked at in the budget, it seemed that they plugged 12% into, and I mentioned this to you, and you had the same thought as I had. It looked like they plugged 12% health insurance number into their budget, then reduced the number to 6%, but never changed the number, which is about a $250,000 difference. So I'm thinking that Scott came back to you and offered you $134,000 out of the $250 that's there. So I'd like to look into that and make sure that we understand that they're saving the difference between 250 and 139 to start, or whatever that number was he gave you today. And I think that that's an extremely important number to this budget. And like I said, I'll reserve most of my comments for when we get into the weeds on this, Chris, but there's a lot of things in this budget, and a lot of comments that you made, and a lot of assumptions that if we're gonna go in at 7.6%, I think we really need to start thinking about whether or not we're gonna add that $100,000 wastewater number, whether we're gonna approve the $139,000 for bathrooms at the track. There's a lot of things that I think we need to look at, as well as the 2 new vehicles that added tonight. And again, 2% Board of Selectmen message to a 7.6% budget, and 61 million to 65 million is not sustainable. That puts us at almost $70 million next year. And the taxpayers, and on top of that, a nice gentleman ran into me in the hallway the other day downstairs, and he was in an extremely bad mood. And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "No." He said, "I just realized that our taxes went down, but my tax bills went way up." So his assessment went up. So that's happening at the same time that our forever increasing tax rate is going up. And again, $30 million ask this year and a $65 million budget. I don't know how we go to town meeting with that. So, thank you for the detail, and
Dana?
Dana?
Yeah, just one other note, you know, a lot of this is based on your 5-year plan, where we're looking at year 3 as being almost level funded, and then in year 4 of your capital projection, we were $1 million short in
You mean
revenue.
the 5-year revenue projection?
Right,
revenue
and then
expense.
in year 5, we were $3 million short, and we know you have to put in a balanced budget, so that means that either something changes between now and then, or we have to stop putting on the brakes. Well, you don't put on the brakes in year 3, anticipating year 4 and 5 are gonna be bad. You start putting on the brakes in year 1 and start slowing the thing down. I think that's where I'm coming from in terms of seeing what you projected out for a 5-year
Yeah, I know there's been some allusion to the projections. You know, to be perfectly honest, there's just too many different changes that can occur. And, you know, I've always been schooled that, you know, you do the 5-year projection, you look at some of those trends, you see if there's ways to moderate those trends. A great example of that is what we're doing on health insurance, by introducing the high deductible plan, by actively doing the wellness plan. And some of those have yielded benefits where if your health insurance trend line is 12%, and, you know, 12% is too high when you have revenue stream coming in at 3.5. But, you know, you could talk to anyone today, and they'll tell you that medical inflation, just medical inflation by itself is 9%, and then prescriptions are probably in a similar amount. And, you know, the art of budgeting here is how do we preserve the organization and maintain some continuity when you have factors that are outside influence. And really the way you do it is, I mean, this isn't any real different than I've seen in many other towns. You spend the resources that you have available to you, that you're allowed to spend, in order to make it. You know, I've been doing this a long time, and I remember one time, I'll say this, if you want to have the budget go down, then there's an inconsistency in the message. When I sit here and I get, well, add positions, and decrease costs, that's not a calculus that works. So, you know, if there's a true desire to actually have the budget come in significantly less, it means layoffs. It means downsizing. And what level of downsize do you want to accomplish? I've always been of the school of thought that you build an organization and you try to maintain that so we can get, you know, fire can get to somebody within 5 minutes, police can get to somebody within a reasonable time. So I've always been of the school of thought, how do you sustain what we have? Try not to grow too fast. But, you know, the board is that, not necessarily this board, but previous boards have asked for more and more positions. That puts more and more pressure on the system.
Chris, I'm going to just throw it out there. The most common answers, I think, given by town administrators and administrators is if you want to decrease a budget, you have to lay people off. And that's not where we would start. So I don't want to even put that out there. And as we get into the depth of this budget, I hope that we can collectively figure out how not to lay people off and reduce this budget. Some of it's spending. So it's not just labor, and that's not where I would want to start. And that's not where we would have to start. Jack, you had a question?
No, page 17. There's a couple numbers that I think maybe a little math issue. Take 1 and 2 and add them together, you get 24,430,000.
Mm-hmm.
You go down to the last paragraph, it refers to a 22,430,000. That's $2 million different. Which one's correct?
They're all correct.
Huh?
They're not
22,430, the 675
Or
is
something's
funded
missing.
by CPC.
So the 22,430 is what's in the capital plan this year.
Mhm.
These are just other components of the wastewater
So they're not
plan.
meant to be the same.
So it wasn't, no, it was never intended.
Okay.
I'm sorry for the
It was the
confusion.
430 that struck me.
I agree, I agree.
Okay.
So thank you
Oh,
for
yeah,
pointing that
thank
out. We should change
Dana,
this.
did you have a follow-up?
No, I'm good.
Okay. Carol, just two questions, Chris, that I'd like to get the answers to. Property and liability, 613,000 last year, 691,000 this year. If we could kind of get a detail on why we're there. I don't need it now because.
Yep, we'll
and
look at
then
that.
The unemployment, you have listed at 20,000 in FY18 and you reduce it to 10,000 in FY19, but the 5-year financial plan calls for 20,000 a year. So were we
Yeah,
able
we
to
can adjust that down to, we've been very successful on unemployment where the taxpayers don't pay a lot for unemployment.
So those are the last two. Thank you.
Could
Carol, go
I
ahead.
just please
Yep.
clarify? Thank you. If we could just go to slide number 3. So I just want to point out to you that the top portion of the slide, those are just major categories. When you get down deeper into the budget, you'll see that the total increase is not 7.6, it's 7.2. But these were just major categories that were meant to give you a large, broad picture.
Yeah, and the one in our packet is 7.2.
It is
I was
7.2.
looking.
So
Okay.
so an all-in budget is a 7.2% increase.
Well, the 2's right, we just have the 7 in the wrong place.
It's not wrong.
Thank you. I'm all set. All set?
FinCom adjourned.
Wait a minute, I have one question.
FinCom's adjourned.
Okay.
I don't see it in front of me, it might be in your message, but in some of the terms, you use a weighted average plus 90%. What's the weighted average? Is that like a 3-year average? What's that mean?
So when you weight an average, you put more emphasis on the most recent actual numbers than you do the prior year, or if you're using a 3-year weighted average. So you'll weight like FY17, for
So you
example.
multiply 1.2 or 1.3 or something to
You'd weight it with you'd say, okay, multiply this FY17 by 3. But FY16 actual, multiply it by 2. And FY15, just
Okay,
multiply
so
it by
it
1,
fills in
and
a
then divide
judgment-
the whole thing by
It
6.
fills in a judgment that the more recent is more
More of a smoothing.
precise than the
Yes.
going back, okay.
All set? Thank you.
Leave that hammer, I don't want you to hold it. I don't know who's it.
That was Mark.
Discussion, not now.
Is that yours or is that a?
Why you want it? Pole dancing is cultural.
Okay.
Is that what
It
you
is.
were told?
I did. No, I looked it up online.
Zachary's came
No, no, if you go up. All right, next part of the meeting tonight is the Water Commissioners interview. So I will call up Judith Underwood, Joseph McParland, and Richard Peter. And Richard, do you want me to call you by Val? That's what, okay. We're going to call Richard Val.
Good. Otherwise you
That's
won't
how
who-
I know him.
Otherwise you don't know who he is.
Yes. And I guess we'll let Gary Carrero and Alan Thompson join us. The hot seats.
Here or over there?
Oh,
No,
right there, it's good.
but
Thank you.
Alan?
Just a little background on me.
Thank you.
I won't bite. Oh, maybe I will.
So Gary, do you want to call your meeting to order?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Call the Water Commissioners meeting to order, public meeting to order.
So as mentioned, this is to fill a vacancy as a water commissioner. We have Alan Thompson and Gary Carrero with us tonight, who are water commissioners, current water commissioners. And this is the process outlined by the town. We advertised the vacancy. You all responded and filled out a citizens' activity form. So, starting with Joe, I'm going to just introduce yourself, quick background, and we'll get into the questions afterwards.
My name is Joseph McParland. I reside at 4 Joanne Way, a name imposed on me by a former chairman of the planning board in Harwich. I've been a member of the planning board for 12 years, and I was sitting here trying to count up how many years I was on capital outlay. I think 10 or 11. I saw this opening appear. I have sometimes not always friendly, but I've had some relationships with the water department. I built my home here. I owned a home and I bought a lot and built a home here. And I don't think these two commissioners were there at the time, but the water department and I tangled a little bit. I ended up being the proud purchaser of a new hydrant at the end of my driveway. So I had some dealings with them at the time. I just think that it's a board that, first and foremost, another one of my, I don't want to call it a complaint because that's not the right word, but the board meets at the water department, in the back of the water department. And talk about a skunk at a lawn party. When you walk in there, this is an open public meeting. You walk in there and here are the commissioners and usually the superintendent. And I just, if this board were good enough to appoint me, one of the first motions I'd make is that meeting should be moved to here, either to town hall or to the community center, so that it's an open public meeting. There's a big budget involved in this department, as I'm sure this board knows, and I know it's self-funded, but, not self-funded, but in other words, they fund it with rates. But on the other hand, and at some point, if they become, and they may never become, but if they become the Water and Sewer Commission, that's going to be a major part of town government. So those are some of the reasons why I'm interested in applying to be appointed to the board. And I should end by saying, and I understand, I would have to run at the annual town election.
Thank you, Joe. Val, introduce yourself, and just to go on from what Joe started, say why you want to be on the Water Commission.
Val Peters, 3 Partridge Lane. I've been in the environmental field since 1984, water and wastewater. I also served on the Citizens Advisory Committee in Harwich a couple of years ago. Left that because my father passed away, and it kind of took the wind out of my sails, so I had to take a break. But I oversee, I work for a private company, Weston & Sampson. I oversee the water and sewer operation. I have many years of experience, and an opportunity presented itself, and I wanted to get back to the town of Harwich. I am involved with Harwich, Chatham, and the whole sewer, so I am very much aware of what's happening, and I just feel as though that I can contribute positively to this community.
Great, thank you, Val.
Good.
Judith, same question.
Judith Underwood, 220 Sisson Road. I'm an educator, an environmentalist, an entrepreneur, creating an institute here on Cape Cod for clean water education and research and innovation. I'm passionate about clean water and passionate about people understanding it. About 5 years ago, when I started at the community college teaching in the environmental tech program and running that program, the president asked me to sit on the regional wastewater task force. So I'm very familiar with the sewering piece, and just through my research and education, I do a lot around drinking water. Innovative processes, traditional processes. And here in town, I had the pleasure to serve with Joe on the board that first looked at repurposing the middle school, and I also serve on the Housing Authority.
Great, thank you, Judith. We're filling a unexpired term because Danette Gonzalez resigned, so this term would only be from now until May, the elections. So I guess one question I would have to start would be, whether you're appointed today or not, would you run in May? And I'll start with Judith.
Yes.
Yes, Val?
I certainly would consider doing that.
Okay. Joe?
Also,
Okay, thank you. If it pleases both boards, I'll kind of go through the questions, and you can listen and write, or I can hand the paper around and you can all ask questions. Whatever I don't ask, you can ask in the end. What experience do you have in public office? And I'll start with Val.
Public office. Again, most of my experience has been through private companies operating the municipal water and sewer. And I did serve on a finance committee in Topsom, Maine, many
Okay.
years ago.
Great, thank you. Joe?
prior to coming to Harwich, I lived in the town of Braintree, and in Braintree, we had elected town meeting where we have open here, but they had elected there. So I was an elected member of the town meeting in the town of Braintree. I also chaired the zoning board of appeals in the town of Braintree for 7, 8 years prior to coming here. And since coming here, I'm on capital outlay. I've been on the planning board. I think that covers it.
Thank you, Joe. Judith?
Currently on the Housing Authority here in Harwich, and served on the Repurpose Committee, and serve on the Regional Wastewater Task Force.
Okay, thank you.
Cape Cod Commission committees.
What is your knowledge of the Enterprise Fund? And Judith, we'll start with you.
I'm very familiar with how it works, done similar
oversight of these kind of things in other positions and international things that I did.
Val?
Kind of unique in the sense that the town of Chatham handles most, or actually handles all the finances. And while I oversee the budgets for water and sewer, the actual day-to-day is actually handled by town employees. So I'm familiar with the enterprise, but not involved in any day-to-day basis.
Okay. Joe?
Enterprise to me means independent, and that's what I understand the enterprise fund is, independent expenditure of funds.
What is your ability to express yourself and your views in a public arena? Joe?
Well,
Here you are. It's on the list, so I'm going to ask you.
I'm afraid to say this, Mr. Chairman. I'm turning my 50th year as a member of the Bar of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, which, among other good things, is you don't have to pay dues after you get to that many. So I've made my living over the years and I continue to practice law. So on my feet. I have a trial tomorrow, actually.
So it doesn't bother you at all?
No, it doesn't bother me.
Val?
I believe I can handle myself in a public environment.
Okay. Judith?
Do a lot of public speaking, do a lot of teaching, and spoke at our town meeting last year on the subject of supporting the wastewater.
Can you keep an open mind and objective mind in reviewing proposals and policies? And I'll start with Judith.
Yes, I did consultancy work for the United Nations, and I survived that, so. Yes.
Val?
Yeah, I'm very open-minded and would allow different opinions and entertain different opinions.
As do I. I don't have any problem with that. And I think in this instance, it has to do with rates and those kinds of issues, which are pretty touchy.
Yes. What do you know about the Harwich Water Department? Have you ever attended one of their meetings? And I'll start with Joe.
As I say, when I first built my home, I was a regular communicant at the Harwich Water Board meetings. I don't think these two members were on it at that
I don't think I was born. You can thick skin, you can.
I would also indicate that although I guess it's done by the town administrator, in my many years practicing law, more than half of my time practicing law, I was a collective bargaining labor relations lawyer. So I feel as though that was a background that could contribute because obviously the folks at the water department are organized and are members of the union.
Okay, thank you. Judith?
I have not attended one of the meetings. I've read through the minutes online.
Val?
I've attended maybe one. We do interact with the Harwich Water Department. I knew Barry, I knew Craig, I know Dan very well as well. So I'm familiar with the operation.
Okay. Will you be able to attend training as it pertains to being a water commissioner? I'll start with Val.
Sure, no problems.
Joe?
Absolutely.
Judith?
Yes.
That was an easy one. Attendance is critical because it being such a small board, will you have a problems attending meetings year-round? And you travel for the winter? I guess that's really the question.
I do not.
Okay. Do you feel you may have any conflicts of interest while serving as a water commissioner? And I'll start with Joe.
Sure. I know of none.
Okay.
Nothing in my practice or in what I do day-to-day as my employment. I don't see anything that would be a conflict.
Okay. Val?
It was an interesting question because when I first found out about this during a meeting between Harwich and Chatham, I asked that exact question, whether or not to be any conflict. And around the room, everyone said no. They felt as though it would not be a conflict.
And I did check with the town administrator, and he agreed. So, Judith?
No.
All right. Part of your fiduciary responsibilities may be having to tell your neighbor he is responsible for paying his water bill. And if he doesn't, you will have to shut off his water. Can you do that? Judith?
Yes.
Yes, Joe,
Not a problem.
Val?
No problem. Quick story, my wife used to work in the water department. She had the distinct honor of shutting off the water of Paul Songus.
Okay.
Go for it.
No problem.
Okay, so final question from me. Why should we consider you? And I'll start with Val on this one.
Because my background, my experience, my interaction with not only Chatham, but also Harwich and the neighboring towns, the water department, my involvement with wastewater, and the fact of the matter is I oversee the wastewater portion as well. And as I think Judy will attest, we run a pretty
Yeah,
good operation.
Great.
And I look forward to continuing to contribute to clean up the environment. So I got a vested interest in that sense.
Great, thank you. Joe?
I would think I could contribute as a member of that board, and I have at least made informally offer that I would resign from the planning board and only serve on this board. On the other hand, it came back to me that members of the Board of Selectmen said, we don't want you to resign from the planning board.
I've been threatened if you do leave that, so. Just throwing that out there.
But to me, it's an opportunity to see another part of work in another part of government. I've always done something in government where I've resided. I'm the son of an Irish immigrant, and that was very important to my father, that you participate in government and contribute something. So I would like the opportunity.
Thank you. Judith?
My background is, it's in water. I'm passionate about clean water. I love my community. I think I bring a different face to this and try to make more of a public connect in the position and just be generally supportive. And it's nice to have a little diversity on the committee as well.
Okay, thank you. Before I get on to the board members, I'm going to ask Chris Clark if he has any questions that I didn't ask or anything that, as our administrator and former water superintendent.
This is your bailiwick. This is a tough call, though, I'll give you that.
Yeah, so you're all set, okay.
Thank you.
Gary, before we go any further, will you just kind of tell them what the meetings are, what the responsibilities are, the time involved?
Yep.
So, Gary
just-
Carrero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to start off, when I ran 3 years ago, I never attended a meeting. They were 8:30, and I work full-time, and I could never make a meeting. Prior to running, I spoke to the commissioners asking if they would consider changing time so a guy like me could run. We changed it to 7 o'clock, hoping that people who wanted to attend could attend. So as of right now, our meetings are every other Wednesday at 7 a.m. They typically last an hour, maybe to an hour and a half, depending on what the agenda is. Certainly encourage people to come to the meetings. I mean, by no means are we trying to hide in the water department. Other than people coming in for abatements, there isn't a lot of activity. I know I've spent a lot of time meeting with the water superintendent, going out with the guys that are either putting in a system or something, just to observe. I certainly don't want to learn their job or do their job, but I do want to have a clear understanding of what they're doing, so I'm making decisions. I'm not negatively affecting them. I mean, that would be on you, to how much time you want to put into it. But yeah, I mean, it is a great department. I'm not sure if there's anything else I can really say. Like I said, every other Wednesday, about an hour, hour and a half, and then whatever time you really want to put into it is really, up to you. We don't have any stipulations as to how much time you need to put into this. I mean, we all work full-time jobs also, so. And we do try to be flexible about meetings. If I have a different shift and I can't make that 7 o'clock, within the 48 hours, we'll post it, and we will change the day all the time so I can make it. So it is flexible to a point, but we don't want to be changing it every week, every other week at the same time, because, again, it's not really fair to the public.
All set? So now I'm going to open it up to questions, comments from board members. I'm going to let Alan go first.
The other thing too that I'd like to inject as far as the meetings go, Our staff works set hours. If we have meetings outside of that, we need to pay overtime. At this point, we don't. Everything that the commissioners or staff would need is right there at Chatham Road, so that they can address issues as we go through a meeting, and it happens quite often. Again, I support what Gary said. We're not trying to hide out anywhere. We're just, our operation is totally for the convenience of everybody. And you have to understand all the parts that come into it and make this happen. Again, like Gary said, we have a fine staff. It couldn't be any better. We're 12 years straight now with top awards for water departments and the large size in the state, which says an awful lot. We put a lot of effort in to make it work. Whoever comes on, Danette's role, it'll be hard to follow her. She was so dedicated to everything about the department and the customers as well. And any time that things would veer off, she was ready to pull it back in. So I'm pleased that you all have come out, and we'll see what happens as we go forward.
Thank you, Alan. Larry?
I'm pleased there are 3 outstanding candidates. I think, just to echo what these 2 gentlemen said, I was liaison for a couple of years, so I have some feeling for the, and it's important, the listening part of this can't be overemphasized. Number one, you have to listen to the staff. And I was going to ask a question, but I'm not going to do that because you guys are good listeners. And then you have to listen to the public, because you're not going to become experts in how to put pipes in as a commissioner. On the other hand, there's a lot of public outreach, not only abatements, but we're having to increase fees almost every year to as, don't talk, Alan, because he'll go on an hour rant. But we have to replace, we have a lot of the sewer pipes and stuff that need to be replaced, and so it's getting capital expenditures. So it's position in my mind is really, listening to both sides of the issues and being open-minded to be sure it happens.
Thank you, Larry. Julie?
Well, first of all, I want to reiterate, it's awesome to have 3 candidates. That's terrific, and I concur that we have a fantastic water department, and there's no more timely era of water than Harwich than what we're about to face, so I think it's great. I don't have any particular questions. I think you all 3 represent excellent pieces of what we need in the community, so thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Janelle?
I don't have any more questions either, but I have a question for Dawn. As
I'm not
the
running for
former
the water
charter-
commission.
We had discussed about making this a 5-member, right? Did we discuss that while you were selectman?
No,
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 but it's
last
been
year.
a community
We did
discussion.
discuss it,
we did.
yeah.
The other
So-
way.
So never mind, I thought I was asking the right person, but, I would like, maybe I should ask you guys, right?
That'd be great.
So, what are your thoughts on that? Especially
we-
going forward with the wastewater component adding so much
We-
weight.
We have met with the selectmen. I thought you were involved in that, but we made a motion to go from a 3 to a 5-person board.
Right, so where
I'll
are we
just-
with
The
that?
reason we're waiting
a
for
draft.
that is for the wastewater to be implemented and for us to absorb that, because that'll also take a charter change. So instead of doing 2
Which is why I
charter
asked him.
changes,
Yeah,
Right.
2
we-
years.
I thought the process was we can do 1 charter change. So that's why we're waiting on it, but we want to go to a 3-person board, from a 3-person board to a 5-person board, because it's just too much. There's just way too
Right,
much.
it's going to get worse.
And that way we can have subcommittees, because with a 3-person board, you can't do that because of open meeting law. So if we go to a 5-person board, we can have a subcommittee and meet with the public or do whatever needs to be done. But that's why we're waiting, because of the charter. Instead of doing 2 charter changes, just do 1 charter change.
Okay, so I wasn't crazy for asking him. I knew it was a charter
Well,
thing.
you're crazy for asking Don, but.
Well, he was the charter guy. But that being said, only one of you can take this interim position, and one of you can win in May. Maybe you'll all run, I don't know. But I would love to see all of you consider 2 years out, when we need a 5-member board, to keep on considering, because this is a hard decision. I'm glad I'm not making it.
You are making it.
I'm not.
Just saying.
I am a board member.
Don?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I knew I was going to get suckered into the charter conversation. The Water Commission actually precedes the modern Board of Selectmen structure by about a half a century, actually, from the 30s to the late 80s. I kind of chuckled at the question that could you shut off your neighbor's water? And that kind of brought the visualization of somebody going with a toolbox out and turning it off. That is the central question. We grapple with it all the time, is in the structure that exists, the Water Commission is really a policy-making board. You're not going to go out and operate the system, for instance. And I just want to make sure that all 3 candidates understand, where that firewall is, because there are employees, there is a superintendent, and they actually perform the duties. The folks who sit on the commission actually, talk about big issues, talk about finances, talk about structure, but not operations in a minutiae way. They don't go in with a tool bucket. So I just want to hear from each of the 3 of you some assurance that you get that, because the temptation gets great to start diddling with things.
Don, I didn't bring my Stilson wrench.
Okay.
I have no intention of jumping in the trenches or grabbing a curb wrench. It's interesting, because Gary talked about job shadowing. Because of my knowledge and because of my experience, I'm well-versed in the task at hand at which each employee is to do. And I understand the time frame in which it should be, the task should take. And I also understand that there are some situations which require a longer period of time. I'm also involved with 5-year capital, so I'm looking at the big picture as opposed to the day-to-day trenches. So I'm well aware where that firewall is.
Thank you, Val. Judith?
I didn't think I was actually going to be able to turn off my neighbor's water.
You
I
just
wouldn't
give
have
Bill's
the
wrench.
strength.
Give her the order.
He's not using it.
No, the order, yes. Yeah, I absolutely understand about the firewall, of course.
Okay, you all set? All 3 of you are great candidates. I think we'd be blessed to have any of you. Very, very difficult decision. Honestly, I wish we were trying to fill the 5-member board at this point.
I have a couple of questions.
Gary?
You started with Alan.
I didn't want to acknowledge you. Go ahead, Gary.
One question is, are you all 3 water customers?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And again, just to reiterate too, we are just a checks and balances board. It's a great department to be part of. There are some hard decisions to make. The biggest one we have coming up probably next will be water rates. We haven't raised water rates in 3 years, and it's a discussion that is coming up. But they're hard decisions that affects, your neighbors, and some decisions aren't that easy to make. So just have to be aware of that too, I guess.
It's happening all over the country.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Currently, Chatham has engaged the services of Doug Gardner of Pioneer Consulting for the water rates. Is this something that the water commissioner is going to be doing? Are they going to be seeking an outside consultant to
Yes.
help with that?
Yes.
All set with the questions?
Yes.
Right, so Gary, I'm going to put you on the hot seat, and you and Alan, you are the 2 sitting water commissioners. You are going to be working with this water commissioner, so I think I'm going to start with them for a potential motion. If the motion doesn't carry, then we'll go to the next person can make a motion. And this is an interesting process that we have, but here we are. So putting you 2 on the hot seat.
Do you want Alan and I to discuss it?
I want
Make
you-
a motion? Do you want me to make a motion, then
I want
if
you and
agrees
Alan
with
to
me?
take a shot at a motion, and we're either all going to agree, or we're going to go to the next
I
person.
think you would accept the nomination of a candidate.
Right.
And then a second, and then vote whether you want that candidate as a whole.
Right.
combined board.
So nomination, a
Process.
second on the nomination, then we'll have discussion about it, and people can say
Okay.
yay or nay, or
Well, if you want me to go first, I'll make a motion to nominate Judith Underwood to the Water Commissioners.
we have-
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded for Judith Underwood. Any discussion on that? Alan?
We'll have to just see how it goes.
Yeah, we'll vote on it. Larry, any discussion?
And I guess I'll vote.
Okay. Julie, anything?
No.
Janelle, anything?
Not yet.
Don, anything?
Okay, I'll bravely dive in here. I kind of like the idea of having the boards and committees of the town look like the town. Danette left. I'd kind of like to maintain at least the one woman in the position, because ideally, the government should look like the people it represents.
Okay.
I like that idea. I think that's important as well.
Well, it's not a self-serving thing on my end.
Gary?
I'd like to make a comment as to why I was nominating Judith. And it wasn't because she was fitting the criteria, but you're really the only one that said that you love the town. And when I ran because I love this town, I wanted to serve. So that's really why I nominated you. I think if you're gonna serve the town, put your feelings aside, do what's best for the town, and, you know, that's what I got from you. And not to say I didn't get that from the others, but you said you love the town, and that's why I went with you.
So this is going to be a majority vote. If we don't get a majority vote, we'll take another nomination and we'll do it again. So, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
5-2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-2, so it carries. Thank you,
Okay.
thank
Thank
you,
you all.
thank you very
Appreciate
much, thank you.
But hang in there for the
Hopefully, you know.
expansion of
hopefully-
this.
I know, the
Yes.
expansion will be coming, so,
Well, the election's coming.
2 seats.
yeah, in the elections.
2 seats coming.
And congratulations, Judith.
Two seats?
2 seats, my seat's up.
So Judith, you'll have to, Chris, that's an official appointment at this point.
Yeah, we'll
We
send you
voted.
the official appointment list.
And then you'll see
appointment notice.
Anita and,
Sandy will send it.
great. Gary, do you want to adjourn your meeting?
I will adjourn our public meeting.
Thank you. Chris, we're on to new business, review of draft annual town meeting articles.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just maybe what the easiest way to do this is just to kind of run through. Maybe I can group them together instead of reading each one. But, so we have the traditional articles, kind of 1, 2, and 3. Article 4, the town operating budget, 5, Monomoy, 6, Cape Tech, 7, water, 8, adopt the capital plan. And then we have continued this practice that we started, I think, last year, the year before, capital items funded from free cash under 100, under 50,000. So we'll list those. Facility maintenance and repair, so those will be items on the capital plan. We did find out, actually, I don't know why I didn't do this earlier, that if we specifically identify, we can fund the snow and ice deficit for FY18. We've historically done a special town meeting within the annual. We don't need to do that. So as long as we clearly designate that it's in 18. So we have placeholders for fund the snow and ice deficit for 18, and then fund any shortfalls and budget transfers for 18. So we have those. They will not necessitate having to have a special within the annual. And just for, we did not receive any petition articles in a timely fashion on Friday. So there are no petition articles, private petition articles. Wastewater, we have fund the construction of Phase 2 of the CWMP, as we discussed. The Dennis Harwich Yarmouth Clean Waters Community Partnership, that's the 1-year request for special legislation to begin negotiation on a regional partnership agreement. The Sewer Enterprise Fund, I will check into that too on the funding of it. That's a great comment. On the Water Department, they have Lower County Road Project, repave. A lot of these are in the capital plan, so we've talked about them previously. Repave access roads, utility, and then reappropriation of bond proceeds. They had some extra money in a bond proceeds that they had to reauthorize the use of it. DPW, the purchase of equipment, the road maintenance program, Fire Department, the ambulance, and construction of Station 2. Cemetery, transfer of land for Island Pond Cemetery so the arboretum can be completed. the construction of the pet crematory and the equipment. The Harwich Cemetery is anticipating commission rules and regulation amendments. Harwich Pet Memorial Garden Rules and Regulations. Under the Golf Department, landscape and Phase 2 completion of landscaping, so kind of those are traditional for golf. Under the Harbor, to accept the grant for the Saquatucket Harbor land side. And then if the selectmen want the lease of a restaurant up to 40 years, have a provision for that. I have not drafted those yet, that's why we just have the summary. Under the zoning, we decided to kind of group these. The green communities, there's a minimum of 2 that we have to do. I'll have to double check. There's some actions the board has to take, some actions that town council has to take. But one is to adopt the energy code, and then the large-scale ground-mounted photovoltaic arrays. Stretch code, I believe both of those are zoning bylaws. On marijuana, the marijuana, and I think on this, the sequence here, so one would be a outright ban, the second would be time, place, and manner, and then the third would be the temporary moratorium. We'll have to check on the sequencing. On the charter bylaw amendments, amend the Harwich Code for Water Commission, as was alluded to, water, wastewater. Composition of town agencies, that's picking the length of term. That's a change to the bylaw. Change to the bylaw on new Harwich Affordable Housing Trust. Special legislation on the annual liquor license. There is a request to increase the amount for the senior work-off program, create a supplemental senior exemption. I think these are from, I saw him in the crowd earlier, from the Board of Assessors. The third one, adopt a clause for personal property tax abatement for National Guard and reservists. That has been on before. I think we have to accept that every other year, so that's going to be something that we will continue to see. Decommission the Architectural Advisory Committee. Central Ave, 4 Central Ave, that was approved last year for sale. We have found a little bit of a defect in the title, so this would be a correcting of that defect. Do it by eminent domain, really for the purposes of just clearing the title. Community preservation, they have actually in total, I think there's like 16 requests, so I tried to find a way to limit some of these, but the first one would be to reserve for future appropriations, put each one in their certain box, 10% for the 3 different purposes, fund land bank, debt service, the community preservation articles, any articles under 50,000, try to use that as a mechanism similar to what we do for capital. I think we have 4 of them in that. The Brooks Free Library restoration, that's 300,000. Construction of municipal public records facility at the community center was 120. Habitat for Humanity was 300,000. The Brooks Park expansion was, I think, 330. Purchase of Cornelius Pond property, that should be a conservation restriction. That's the 200,000. Judah Eldridge, as was alluded to earlier. Fund the Harwich Affordable Housing Trust and Hinckley's Pond remediation and public access improvements. On the private petitions, these are kind of standard ones too. Defray the cost for the Chase and Harwich Port libraries, promote the town of Harwich, which is really the Chamber of Commerce, supplemental funding for Mass Cultural Council, and then, as was alluded to when the Carol Ridley came in from Pleasant Bay, that we would do the IMA. That technically doesn't have to be done at a town meeting, but I think just for disclosure, and certainly what we do with Chatham, we did. And then also the Pleasant Bay Management Resource Plan, that is up. Is that once every 10 years that has to be renewed?
Yeah, 5 years.
5 years.
We're asking you to go for 20 years.
They're asked to go for 20. And then community center hours for Sundays and holidays.
That's under private petitions, Chris,
Yeah,
that wasn't in?
I'll have to check on that. That's.
That came in on the wrong form.
Yeah, it's not gonna,
Yeah, that came in
that's
on
off.
the wrong form. So I stand corrected, maybe we did get that. I'll take a look at that. On the revolving and stabilization OPEB funds, just the annual revolving fund authorization, putting money into stabilization, putting money into OPEB, and then reserve for fund prior years unpaid bills. There, you see that there's a cross out. On the next 3, I brought Bob Lawton on board, and Bob you know, it's kind of interesting sometimes to get a second set of eyes looking at things. He actually asked the town attorney, we've had these on historically, so there is a historic element to it, and I recognize that. But the compensating balancing agreement, the liability for tidal and non-tidal rivers and herring fisheries, they really don't do anything. So if
I would
there
argue,
is
if I
a-
may, that the Herring River
Oh,
one
yeah.
closes the meeting in a high note, and people expect it.
I'm glad you said that, because
And
if
I would-
I was
I would
gonna
vote
keep
to leave that
one,
one on.
we would keep one as
too.
a traditional closing.
I'd keep the herring.
I would,
Herring? Okay.
because
That's why
people-
you saw him
The
on
kids are
there,
involved
and
in
I had a
that one.
Yeah.
soft cross out, just to be
I
able to
didn't
have
want to
that
interrupt you,
discussion.
but now you're getting serious.
But we can keep that on there, that's fine.
Okay.
And those are what we have initially. There may be one or two more, but that's kind of what's coming in, and we will certainly work to craft that.
Chris, when does the final have to be done? Because number 32, I'm gonna bring back in 2 weeks, the lease for the restaurant. Based on the planning's parking structure that they put for us, I have a feeling that that one's not gonna fly.
Yeah, I think it's the last week in February, we have to turn it over to the
Okay.
Finance Committee. So I think we will have 2 meetings before.
So that's coming back in 2 meetings, not next week, but the week after. And then I guess we all agreement that we'll call the special first, so we don't have to
Yeah.
have a special a second night? So we'll do
Well, there will be no special.
or we can do
There's
that
no
in the
need
regular?
for a special,
No need for
yeah.
a special. You can do that in the regular, okay.
Yeah. I
Unless you
will-
get petitions,
Yeah,
right?
I'll see, because I think that then the petition, if you guys call a special and we don't need one, then I don't think you have to call it.
I was under the understanding last year that we had to call it.
Well, we certainly had to wait around last year.
Right. And that we got
Yeah.
asked at Michael
I
Ford.
don't think
That's
we
for
need
last
to.
minute things as much as anything else.
That was again kind of Bob Lawton kind of saying, and I've been in other towns where we didn't have
Okay.
specials and you do it.
So that's,
So if we don't call a special, then there's no opportunity for people to submit articles, so they would have to submit a petition, I think, to have you guys call a special, which is a slightly different process, if I remember right.
and then on marijuana, I thought there was 4, Chris. I thought there was a general bylaw to prohibit, a zoning bylaw to prohibit, a time, place, and manner, and then the moratorium.
Yes, I think what the zoning and the general were able to merge together in
Okay.
one.
But we still have the 4.
Yeah, the 4 concepts are
Concepts.
still very much out there.
And then I'm not sure where the board is with this, but in my mind, we need as many people at town meeting as we can get on the marijuana, and that should be at the front of the agenda, before people get tired in the end or the middle and leave.
Well, I thought about that, and just my 2 cents.
Sure.
I would anticipate that town meeting generally goes 2 nights.
Mhm.
And if there's nothing that is of significant substance, the second night may be hard to get a quorum.
Right.
So my thought process is, and I didn't look this up very carefully, but if we could get the first night and get 1 through 34 done, the second night would then be, the
Open
beginning
with
would be
it.
marijuana. And then that would almost, I don't want to say guarantee people would come out, but I think that that is something that will draw some people.
Okay,
So the idea was to try to make sure we have a quorum on the second night.
okay. Do we want to take that risk?
Do we have to decide right this second?
You don't have to decide now, we can redo the order,
Give
but,
it some thought.
yeah, I just want to at least lay that out.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not so sure I would have used the phraseology, something of substance with the marijuana bylaw. But that having been said, I don't know, I just throw my 2 cents in here. I've seen an awful lot of town meetings, and I think the level of interest and participation on either direction of this is probably a vehicle to get more people in, rather than seeing them fall away. And even at that, falling away within the confines of a regular town meeting, if you get past an article, it can always be reconsidered on that same night. So the advantage of it being here when you've got the budget and other things on the first night is probably offset by the fact that there's, at least I'm hearing that, I don't know if you folks are, that there's a lot of people on both sides that plan on being there to weigh in. So it could be the hook
To get them there.
to get them there, to have a
So what
quorum
Michael said.
on the second night.
Oh, on the second
Saying
night.
on the second night.
Oh, on the
Second
second night.
I'm trying not to overthink this.
All right.
because I don't know whether we...
Yeah, it's the first draft, so
Okay.
more the idea is to just lay some stuff on the table for the board to think about.
Anything else anyone sees
Yeah.
they want to address?
I just have a question about the special. So at this point, we don't have a special, but if, for instance, the citizen that put the petition together on the wrong form called me today, and I didn't know what the answer was as far as getting it on the right form. I know that now he needs 100 signatures instead of 10. So if we don't have a special, is that a moot point, or how is a special called?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, there is a
100
mechanism that
signatures.
compels the selectmen to call a special. I think the threshold is a higher number than 100. I don't recall what it is, but
Is what I'm thinking,
it would be
because
something, I mean, well, there's two ways to go. We can certainly look up in the charter, and if it's 250 votes or 250 signatures that are validated to call, force the board to call it. I mean, certainly if someone has something that they want to have, they can petition the board, and then you have plenty of time to call a special within the annual. So there are two means to get that before town meeting. But to your point, and maybe just for the general public, that by not having anyone submit on Friday in a timely fashion, and I will check if that was submitted, and I have that wrong, it's only 10 signatures for the annual, it's 100 signatures for the special to get an article on. So it is a more significant threshold that needs to be met. But you certainly, if you think it's your warrant, so if you want to add something on, you could certainly add the merit of what they submitted and call a special within the annual.
I think the special, but if it's $1 asking for funds, it has to be approved by the finance committee too.
That's right.
That's right, that's
And
right.
That doesn't happen
The
in
warrant
the-
article doesn't need that. Well, it does need a second approval of finance committee. So there are two barriers, more signatures, and FinCom
Thank you.
I think has to weigh in.
And Chris, I met with the clerk today, and that was in fact the wrong form, and she's not accepting it.
Not accepting.
Right, so.
It didn't come from her office, though, if I understand it. It's
No,
not like we
actually,
gave out the wrong form.
It actually came from me. This is from last year. So the same person tried the same thing last year and asked me a year ago, when I was at work, if I could get the form for the special. But I got 3 copies and gave them to him.
Okay.
So not knowing that that was the wrong form for this year's regular town meeting.
Yep.
Just used the form that I gave him last year, so that's why he called me, and I said I had no idea. I didn't know there were 2 forms.
Any-
Two different standards.
Anything else on the warrant? All set? Town administrators report?
Thank you. Just 2 things, Mr. Chairman. I think I've spoke plenty tonight. On the Housing Trust membership, there was a question as to whether a member of the Board of Selectmen could stand on that. There are 2 different statutes, one under the charter and one under the Housing Trust, and a member of the board can and should be on by statute. So in terms of the structure of the Housing Trust membership, a board member can be on. Also on the same ballot type of thing, or same question, we did get an opinion from KP Law on the Housing Authority. There is a vacancy on the Housing Authority, or will be a vacancy, and there are 2 schools of thought. One is you can put it on the ballot, have the position be filled, and if you're going to do that, you should fill it for 4 years, because that's the remaining length of the term. The problem is if the state gets its act together and decides a process, that person may then have to be removed to follow the process that the state has laid out. There's supposed to be a tenant representative on that commission. The other avenue would be, do not put it on the ballot and leave the position vacant, and after the election, you could then bring in the Housing Authority and fill the vacancy for a 1-year term to see if the state finally gets its act together and decides the process for the tenant position. So the answer is you can go either road. I would think that the town clerk would probably appreciate if we are going to put it on the ballot, to know that sooner, so she can plan for that to be on the ballot. If it's not, also to have it off.
I spoke to her about that today too, Chris, and I agreed to put it on the agenda for the 26th for a vote.
Okay. And those were the two things that
This
I
is
had.
making my head spin, this going back and forth with state, not knowing what they want. And, yeah, we have a lot of serious discussions. It's hard to keep this a serious discussion.
Well, we're in innovative times, Larry.
Chris, anything else, Town Administrator's report?
All set, thank you, Mr.
Selectmen's report, Don?
Yeah, in real time, I just looked this up in the state.
The right charter or the wrong charter?
This is above that. This is the state law.
Okay, all right.
For petitioning a special town meeting, it's the lesser of 200 registered voters or 10% of the registered voters in town. So it would be 200.
Okay, thank you, Don. Anything else, Selectmen's report? Janelle?
I don't have anything right now.
Larry?
I have two suggestions. Going through the departmental reports, which again,
Yes.
I appreciate. And one is I think the Board of Health is starting to talk about this, but I would like to, Chris, and Michael, get some sense of where they're going on their sewer regulation policies. Some policy decisions we have to make in terms of, for instance, if they sewer a neighborhood in 3 or 4 years going, will the Board of Health allow them to delay putting in a septic tank until that is in place? And there's some other things that I'm sure they're thinking about, but it'd be nice for them to give us a report of where they are and what they have left to do on it, because that'll be an important subject that hasn't quite hit us yet, but it will. The other, the police report talked about talking opioid prevention, abuse prevention, the discussions they've had at school, I think. I'd be interested, and I bet people watching our selectmen's meeting of an update of what they're presenting to the schools and where we are as a town. We hear a lot of stuff going on everywhere else. But maybe you could get, Mr. Chair, if we could maybe bring those on as an agenda item in the future of where we are in those two items. Not a long dissertation, but an update. I think people would appreciate it. I know I would.
Schedule those as soon as we can get them in. Julie?
I attended the Selectmen's breakfast last Friday.
I almost forgot.
It was a good
sweet.
talk with Tony Shepley and Wendy Northcross, and just a lot, again, about the issues that we face, which are job development, housing, and trying to figure out a way to move forward. And I thought it was interesting because there was some good conversation, then there was some reiteration of what we already all know. But they were excellent at explaining that we really needed to push forward and figure out new ways. So it was good.
It turned into, as sometimes happens, a very passionate discussion
Did.
on what's needed on tax relief.
All set?
But I would agree with Julie. Affordable housing was still the #1 issue that comes up every time.
I just wanted to comment on the wastewater support committee's meeting this week, and I thought that the presentation by CDM Smith was excellent to hear. As much as we can get before the board, that presentation and everything we can get, we really need to start running with the education part of the wastewater. Town meeting is approaching fast. I know there's still a lot of work to be done, but there were some pretty big numbers thrown around in that meeting, and there's still a lot of uncertainties. So I'll bring that back as well for a topic probably next week, definitely the 26th, so that we can start or continue the education process. But important to note that the consultants are working on it diligently. Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
We meet the 20th.